Welcome to a quick discussion of Metroid. In anticipation of the franchise's 35th anniversary, and also the recently announced Metroid Dread, I wanted to play a little bit of the original. When Metroid released in 1986, it was incredibly groundbreaking. Unlike a lot of other side-scrollers of this era, Metroid heavily emphasizes open-ended, non-linear level design, instead of simple left-to-right stages. So, instead of individual stages, we have a large, interconnected world to explore. As the intergalactic bounty hunter Samus Aran, we have to go through the planet of Zebes in order to defeat Metroids, a dangerous race of alien lifeforms that were stolen by space pirates from the Galactic Federation. So basically, in Metroid, we have to explore various areas of this planet, collecting different items and power-ups to get stronger, and access new areas. For example, by going left at the start, we can collect the Morph Ball to roll under this area, which is honestly really good level design. I like having this little section here to kind of force you to go left at the beginning, to kind of get you used to the style of gameplay in Metroid, since so many side-scrollers were built around left-to-right movement at this time. It wasn't the first game in this genre, but it's definitely one of the more prolific examples of a Metroidvania, as the name would suggest, based on the fact that it is named after Metroid and also Castlevania. Metroidvanias are incredibly popular nowadays, with tons of really amazing examples in the last few years. But the Metroid series itself has kind of struggled over the years. I really like these games, but they've never sold particularly well, even though most of them actually were fairly popular among people who actually played them. So my first Metroid was Metroid Fusion, along with Zero Mission and Prime. I started playing these games after playing Super Smash Bros. Melee and Brawl, and I wanted to play the series because Samus is one of the main characters in Smash Bros. I basically had a Game Boy Advance at the time, so actually I think it was a DS more specifically, so I basically wanted to start there, and I really liked these games. They were kind of difficult at first. I wasn't really used to this style of gameplay at the time, but I really do like Metroidvanias nowadays. The Prime games are first-person instead of side-scrollers, and I'm not the biggest fan of first-person games, so I do prefer the side-scrolling ones, even though I do think the Prime trilogy is very good for what it is. This game in particular, I wouldn't play until the 3DS, for the Ambassador program. So for people who bought a 3DS before the initial price drop, you could get free games. 10 NES games and 10 Game Boy Advance games. I actually got my 3DS right when the price drop was happening, so some retailers actually dropped it a little bit earlier than intended, so I actually got it for the reduced price and also got the free games. So I did play Metroid on the 3DS. And this game is simultaneously really cool for what it is, and not a game I can fully recommend. It's not an easy game to go back to because it's honestly really dated. For one thing, there's a lot of lag and slowdown. There's also no map system, so we have a game built around exploration with no map, so you have to manually keep track of where you've been or where you need to go. This is definitely a game where I would recommend using a guide to make things a lot easier. I definitely played with a guide and a map to avoid getting super lost. And Metroid 2 also doesn't have a map, so those games aren't exactly the most accessible to play through. The first game that I actually would recommend in order of release would be Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo. It's honestly really great. It's not my favorite, partly because of nostalgia, because I started with Fusion and Zero Mission, but Super Metroid is a lot of fun. Basically, that kind of became the standard for the series. with basically every other game being built off of Super Metroid. But it does feel a little bit dated at times, so I would recommend actually going with the Game Boy Advance games first. The only downside of that is the GBA games have never been re-released outside of the Wii U Virtual Console, so they're not exactly easy to find nowadays, unless you have a Wii U. Unfortunately, at the time of this recording, Game Boy Advance games, or even Game Boy games, aren't available on the Switch Online, so yeah, it's not exactly easy to play those, even though those are the games I would recommend starting with. Fusion is a lot more linear. There's an AI character who actually guides Samus through various different parts of a space station, and while the directions aren't while the directions are very specific, oftentimes you aren't really given a specific route to get there. So even though you know where to go, it's up to you to figure out how to actually get there. Zero Mission also uses a similar system of basically telling you where you need to go, but not telling you how to get there, and I think that's a good balance. Of, like, not being overly direct, but also not being too cryptic either. Chronologically after Fusion is Metroid Other M, one of the more divisive games in the series because the gameplay is okay, but the story is really terrible. It's basically kind of like a side story to Fusion that explains some of the events that are mentioned in Fusion, but in my opinion it's kind of irrelevant because Fusion does a better job of explaining it than Other M does. So yeah, Other M is not very well liked for a lot of reasons. It's definitely one of the less good Metroid games, but for the most part the series is pretty well done. My favorite is probably Zero Mission, and it's because of Zero Mission that I can't really recommend playing this game nowadays, because Zero Mission is a full remake and reimagining of this game. So basically, it's such a good remake that it kind of replaces this game. Some remakes are a little bit more of reimaginings, to the point of being different enough from the original, where both versions can stand apart. But with Metroid, because of how dated this game feels and how much better Zero Mission is, I feel like it's very easy to recommend Zero Mission in comparison. Though it might be fun to play this game if you like the series and want to see where everything began. For Metroid 2, it's a bit of a tougher call. The original Game Boy version is available on the 3DS Virtual Console, but again, Game Boy games are not on Switch, so you would have to have a 3DS. I hope someday there are Game Boy games on the Switch Online to make it a little bit easier to go back and catch up on, like, Metroid. Metroid 2 also got a remake, Metroid Samus Returns, but that's more of a drastic reimagining, to the point where there is some debate over what the best version is. Especially because, in the case of Metroid 2, there's also an excellent fan remake called Another Metroid 2 Remake, or AM2R. Basically, there are a lot of debates over which remake is better between the two. I haven't actually played AM2R, but I do like Samus Returns. Samus Returns is interesting because it wasn't made entirely by Nintendo. It was also worked on by a company called Mercury Steam, which had worked on the Castlevania Lords of Shadow games before Samus Returns. Those games are fairly polarizing. I hear Lords of Shadow 1 is okay, but the others are not great. I do like Samus Returns a lot, though. So I am excited that Mercury Steam is getting another chance with Metroid Dread, which was recently announced at E3 2021. I am really excited about this game. I'm still really excited for some of the other games announced, but because of how soon it is, Metroid Dread is probably my most anticipated game out of E3. And I'm not even the biggest Metroid fan, but it's really exciting for a few different reasons. Metroid Dread has a ton of history behind it. Around 2004, mentions of a new Metroid called Metroid Dread started popping up in like gaming magazines. But the game never materialized. I'm pretty sure no footage or screenshots were ever shown of this, even though it was heavily rumored. Basically, the game was planned for DS and then never released. And now it's finally happening, and I think it's really cool. I really like the idea of bringing back something that was basically cancelled years ago and finally resolving this sort of plotline, because Fusion does leave a few things open-ended, even though it's relatively resolved, and it's also really cool just to get a sequel after like 19 years. And it looks really cool too. It looks like it takes the basic concept of Fusion and kind of expands upon it. For example, in Metroid Fusion, there's an entity known as SAX that basically chases Samus around through certain areas, and it feels like the robots in Dread are kind of like that same concept, but more advanced. So I'm really excited about this. I hope it turns out as well as it looks, and I'm actually really confident about this, partly because they're calling it Metroid Dread. To put it bluntly, that's a lot of pressure, reviving a 15-year-old project. So I feel like they must be really confident to actually call this Dread. So yeah, that actually gives me a lot of hope in this. With the Prime games, I actually am still excited for Prime 4, but as a bigger fan of the 2D Metroids, I'm actually totally okay with Prime 4 for getting more development time and getting Metroid Dread in the very near future. I hope Prime 4 turns out really well, and I would like to hear more about it someday, but until it's shown off, it's just a matter of waiting and hoping for the best. I'm pretty sure one of the earliest Prime games I played was actually a spin-off, Metroid Prime Hunters for the DS. That game is very unpopular because of using touch controls for aiming, and it's kind of cool in some ways and also kind of annoying in other ways, because it's definitely tricky to play. I actually have the 3DS stand from Kid Icarus Uprising, which has a very similar control setup, and that actually helps playing Metroid Prime Hunters, because of using the touchscreen to aim in both. So yeah, it's definitely not the most comfortable game to play, but I do like it a lot because of nostalgia, partly. But I do like Echoes as well, even though some parts of that game are very frustrating. And Prime 3 I really don't remember much of. The most unpopular Prime game is a spin-off called Metroid Prime Federation Force. So Federation Force was announced during a lull between Other M and Samus Returns. So it was the first Metroid game announced in like 5 years or something, and it made people really unhappy because Other M was very disliked, and following that up with a spin-off where you don't even play as Samus was seen as a huge disappointment. Personally, I've always thought that if Samus Returns and Federation Force had been announced at the same time, the backlash would not have been nearly as bad, because at least we would have known we were getting a main series Metroid, even if it was just a remake. So yeah, overall, the Metroid series has never really been a huge sales success. I'm actually thinking Dread could be really popular. It has no competition. Samus Returns did pretty poorly because it was a 2017 3DS game, so basically people were tunnel-visioned on the Switch at that point, so Samus Returns kind of got forgotten about. But also, with Metroid Dread, because the Switch is a few years into its run, plenty of people already own the console, so the attach rate for software is really high, and some franchises that normally don't sell particularly well are actually finding newfound success on the Switch just because so many people have Switches in the first place. So it gives me hope that we'll see some positive results from this game. I have a feeling it'll be popular critically at the very least, because Metroid games usually are, but in terms of sales, I feel like it could easily end up being the best Metroid game, because that is an incredibly low bar, to put it bluntly. So yeah, even as a fan of the series, I recognize it's a fairly niche series, even though it's heavily represented in Smash Bros. And other like crossover properties like Nintendo Land. I definitely think Metroid, this could be a big moment for Metroid if Dread turns out as well as everyone is hoping. If it really is as amazing as the original demos and trailer at E3 looked, I think it could be a huge success. People have been wanting a new Metroid for a very long time, and yeah, coming out on the Switch, without any sort of competition, because it's kind of targeting a different core audience than something like Mario Party releasing the same month, I really hope this game takes off. I would love to see Metroid become more of a sales success after being a fan for a while. I realized something about myself actually because of Metroid Dread, that even though I'm not really a huge Metroid fan, it kind of intrigued me that I'm still very familiar with the concept of Dread. Like, even though I am not a huge fan, and I usually will play the games like once and then not really play through them again for a really long time, and they're not like my favorite games ever or anything, I still was very aware of the history of Metroid Dread, and thought it was like really amazing that they're finally doing this. So yeah, it's kind of a historic moment for the franchise, having a long-lost title finally materialize, and I hope it's good. So, for the Metroid series, I feel like it could have a bright future ahead of it, and that's kind of cool after so many years of the franchise kind of being forgotten about. Because it was never the biggest sales success, it always felt like it went under the radar a bit with Nintendo, actually, with the series having long gaps between releases, like the release of, or the time between, like, games is very long with Metroid compared to other games. So yeah, here's hoping that the series finally manages to find its footing, especially because of how popular Metroidvanias in general are at the moment, with plenty of indie examples that are incredibly well liked. So yeah, things are looking good for this franchise, and I hope everything turns out as well as everyone is anticipating. I know I'm really excited for this new game, and I have actually been thinking about my Metroid plans, because I had actually planned to go through the Prime games in chronological order in anticipation of Metroid Prime 4, but now I think I might move some of my plans forward. I might actually break chronological order and go through Fusion soon, because I do like that game a lot, and that is the direct predecessor to Dread. So yeah, expect more Metroid Let's Plays in the future, especially because I haven't done a Metroid playthrough in a very long time. So yeah, I might try to go through a Metroid game soon. So yeah, if that happens, look forward to that. In any case, I think that's about all I had to say about the series, and also the first Metroid, for now. So, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another discussion.